it is my distinct pleasure. She is the reason I just dropped some Lauryn Hill. She has over 20 years of experience in developmental finance. She has an MBA in finance and a master's in international economics. She's also an expert in organizational health. A phenomenal lady who says my makeup is gorgeous. Clearly, she has great taste, right? M.A. Essien Laure, welcome to Double O Direct.
Thank you, Olivia. I think everybody should have you introduce them. That was fantastic. Thank
you. I'm talking to you people at IFC. I'm talking to you World Bank, IMF. Everybody should have me introduce them. Because speaking of IFC, you were at IFC Nigeria as country manager for 6 years, right?
Yes. I spent 20 years at IFC, almost 20 years in total, and 6 years in Nigeria. It was a fantastic opportunity to contribute to what was and continues to be a very challenging set of circumstances for a very dynamic country, right? And so to be a part of a team of people who are trying to really push the needle on development was just really an honor. It was a lot of work, a lot of hard work, fantastic team. I'm a little bit biased here, let me just say.
As we go into
because my parents are Nigerian. Although I wasn't born there. Yes, my parents are Nigerian. So I'm of Nigerian extraction.
Okay.
But I'd never lived there before. So that was my first time living there. Had you visited? I visited, yes, but never lived. Living in Nigeria is a special thing.
For special people.
For special people.
I failed.
Did you?
I almost got engaged there. The plan was to live in Lagos. Of course, that plan did not materialize.
Olivia, wow. Okay. We have to talk about this.
Off mic. We're going to come together.
Yes.
So tell me about yourself, M.A.
Yeah. So I, as I mentioned, spent over almost 20 years at IFC. My entire career has been in development finance. And it has, for me, been an opportunity to really kind of combine my background in finance, which I love, with what I care about, which is development, particularly in Africa. And so working at the World Bank Group has given me the opportunity to do that and do that in many, many countries. So it was a great blessing to have the opportunity to work there. And as you said, I spent some time in Nigeria, which was really eye-opening as well, because again, you get a clear sense of how government officials, titans of industry, as they call them in Nigeria, and people in civil society are really trying to come together to make things better, to push the needle. But it's really difficult. It's very difficult. So big economies like Nigeria, like Kenya, Ghana, South Africa, it's really challenging. It's easy to criticize, but frankly, it's really tough to bring all those things together so that they can actually serve the people that they're supposed to serve.
Backtracking slightly, our CFO wants to be Mukhtar Diop 2.0.
Does he?
I don't know.
Yes.
But the point is, how does one get into the IFC? I want to find out that, because I want to find out more about you, M.A., before we get into, unconscious bias and how you ended up in developmental finance. Mm-hmm. The education required, of course, I've seen you have a master's, you have an MBA, but also maybe a little bit of what is required with regards to even soft skills, right? That I'm sure now you're blessed with in plenty.
So definitely, things have changed, to be honest. When I started out in my career, it was very strict, right? There was a script. Yes. You have to have an MBA. You had to have gone to certain types of schools.
Such as? Let's be honest.
Yeah, some of the better schools, what was considered the better schools, Ivy League schools, the better schools across the world, right? It's not just the US or the UK, across the world. So institutions like IFC pull people from all across the world. So when I started, though, it was very focused on kind of a little bit of a club. Over the years, that's changed a lot. So IFC rarely recruited from Kenya or Nigeria directly. Now they do. Okay. Now countries like Kenya, South Africa, IFC will go directly and recruit people who've never been to the US or never schooled in the UK. So that's been a great change. And that speaks to actually diversity and inclusion, by just kind of spreading their wings and
Joseph,
decentralizing.
There is hope. Joseph, there is hope.
And there are incredible people that have schooled completely here, educated completely here, and who are thriving at organizations like the IFC. So you don't have to go outside to do it. Although it's good to do that. And it's good to go outside and experience other things because you learn more. Yes. Right? You stretch yourself when you go and engage with people from different backgrounds and different cultures. If you just sit in your little box, you just, no matter how bright you are, you're going to be a bit limited.
Yes.
In terms of soft skills, I would say, emotional intelligence, which all of us could do better on, right? And by that I mean, and this is where the conversation on unconscious bias is going to come in, is just having a good understanding of yourself and the people you're working with. I would probably say the most important soft skill to have is communication, right? So knowing when to speak and how to speak, knowing when to interrupt and how to interrupt, knowing what to say in an open group and what to say directly to somebody. Just being cognizant of all that, not being led by your emotions, but being led by what's the right thing at this moment in order to really bring people around the table so that you can get a better outcome. If you're led by your emotions, and everybody's smart, right? So then if everybody's competing that way, well, we hope.
Well, no, at the IFC. Well, yeah.
You don't get too far. Yeah. People are just, everybody's in the ring and just kind of scrapping it out. So those people who can step back and think about, okay, what's happening here and how can we make sure that we have a better outcome by having a better conversation. So I think those kind of soft skills, and it doesn't matter. You don't need to be just a CEO to do that. You can be a receptionist. You can be, the IT guy. You can be anybody across an organization like that and have a very important role in terms of leadership, in terms of bringing teams together for better conversations and outcomes.
Beautiful. Outside of the IFC, outside of the trainings and the workshops, who is MA?
Oh, okay. Who is MA? So I consider myself a Pan-Africanist. I don't know if people use that word anymore. It's very old school.
No, I've seen some, yeah.
Yeah, I was born and raised in the U.S. Mm-hmm. Never, my parents are Nigerian, but I'd never visited Nigeria.
Or Africa?
Until my 20s, I had never visited Africa. Right? So, but I had an opportunity to visit in my 20s, Nigeria for the first time. And it was, you can imagine, it blew my mind. Met my last remaining grandparent at that time. And then I was open to the opportunity of actually living in Africa, had an opportunity to work in Ghana, and that kind of set me on a path. So Emma is somebody who I care very deeply about the progress of this continent. And I say that with confidence, and there's no reservation in me putting Africa first, because I recognize that in almost every sphere, we've got a way to go. And if we don't get it right, our children and our children's children are going to suffer the consequences of it. So for me, that's when I say a Pan-Africanist, I want to put Africa in front of every conversation and make sure that, voices are heard, people are seen wherever we are. So I care about that. I'm now, I guess, an adopted Kenyan. My husband is Kenyan. So Kenya is now where I stay. My kids are Kenyan. So I have come to really, really love this country. It is an amazing country for many, many reasons. So, and I feel very at home here. So you can put me any place, frankly. I'd be comfortable. I've visited almost every country on the continent, I think. So you put me any place, I'd feel pretty comfortable. But Kenya is special.
Standardmedia.co.ke. That's where you'll find the live stream. Good afternoon. Happy 2023. Did I wish you a happy 2023?
I did. Thank you.
Now we're on the phone.
Wishing you the same.
Thank you. I'm Olivia Otieno, Double O Direct, safe space for women with a woman host, music by women, and only women guests. Yeah, every Saturday from 10 a.m. Thank you so much, Stitchworth Fabrics and Designs, for the gown I'm in today. I am feeling phenomenal. Have you watched the new Wakanda?
I have, and you look phenomenal. So, yes.
Did you see Angela Bassett's arms? Did you see her arms, like in her gown?
She's always like that. Oh, she's incredible.
Yeah.
She's fire. Yeah. She's always,
top. So I'm feeling like Angela Bassett of the Golden Globes.
Yes.
I am. And so to be my woman in fashion, just like Stitchworth Fabrics and Designs are, all you got to do is hit me up on Instagram. My handle is my name, Olivia Otieno. And I've had back and forth, a lady who has over 20 years experience in development finance. She has an MBA in finance and a master's in international economics. You know what? I was going through the schools. So we have Wharton. Yeah.
Yes,
I'm
yeah.
trying to remember. So there was Wharton. Which was where did you get your undergrad?
Columbia. New York.
Columbia, Wharton, and then Johns Hopkins.
Yes.
Extremely phenomenal schools, extremely phenomenal woman. Her name is M.A. Essien Lore. I want to understand now, you're great with the numbers. You're a finance expert. But now getting into you being an organizational health expert, just how did that transformation happen?
So, yeah, I mean, I've always been fascinated by people and what motivates people. Yeah. So when I started my career, I think like every good, child of African immigrants, you don't have many choices of what to do. So I didn't want to do engineering. Medicine wasn't for me. So finance, that seemed hardcore enough. So I did that. And I enjoyed it. I've enjoyed it tremendously. I spent the first part of my career in New York working on Wall Street. I did that, and coming to IFC after that, focused very much on private equity financing, et cetera.
Yes.
Now, and that's been an incredible journey for me. But what happened for me, and particularly it started when I moved to Nigeria, and I came in contact with so many amazing entrepreneurs and incredible businesses. And what's really special about, I think, working in that context is that every single entrepreneur I met created this company because they wanted to solve a problem.
Okay.
They experienced something in their community, in their life, and they felt that they had a solution for it. And that's just really motivating, right? So you work with these people, you try and help them with their, they want to expand, they need to grow. So as a financier, you come in and you help them with that, right? You help them think about what they need to do, and then you provide the financing, whether it's debt or equity. Financing goes in, company, moves ahead. But life happens, right? And so I always say this is Africa, something is going to happen. Either the currency is going to depreciate, or in the case of Nigeria, plummet, right?
Yeah.
Or there's going to be some other shock to the system. You're going to have a big competitor come in and steal all of your clients. The road that was taking your suppliers to you is gone now. Something is going to happen that's going to completely take your business plan and it's going to just scatter everything. And so that's where the rubber hits the road. And that's where I saw some of these great entrepreneurs and founders have a lot of resilience and kind of get through it by leading their teams really well. And then there was another group who just fell apart. Oh. They became kind of dictatorial. They thought they knew everything. They kind of imploded a bit. And those companies just
withered,
yeah. Right? And so in the context of Africa, we can't afford to have our companies wither, right?
No.
We need economic activity. And so it broke my heart often. But because you would often see that if you could just do it this way, if you could just engage your team in this way, then you could actually get through this very difficult storm. But then that didn't happen often. And so for me, it became about leadership. Mm-hmm. Not just about, do you have the right operations? Do you have the right team? Leadership matters. And leadership starts from the top. Can't make this up. It has to be from the top. And so I started really paying much more attention to that and realizing that as somebody who was on the side of providing capital,
yes,
I have a role in helping to influence entrepreneurs, leadership teams, boards, to start thinking about how they're going to be leading their teams in such a way that we can navigate difficult periods, because difficult periods will come.
Yes.
For sure. It's inevitable. Okay. And so that's what got me passionate. And since I'm really interested and motivated about people and people's motivations, it just connected for me. And organizational health is about how you support companies to be resilient in difficult times. And it really ultimately is about leadership.
Yes.
Right? It's ultimately at its core, it's about leadership. People talk about processes. They talk about governance. Governance is critically important as well. I spend a lot of time focusing on governance because it's the codification of how you do things, how you make decisions.
Yes.
But leadership is at the core.
I heard a quote recently that we get it twisted with regards to board members, especially here in Africa and in Kenya with regards to their role. And this is actually from Michael Joseph. I don't know if you know who that is.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
just checking.
Yes.
And he actually said in a recent interview that most board members are confused. They think that their role is operational, but actually their primary role is governance, ensuring good organizational governance. Is that something you'd agree with?
Absolutely. He's absolutely right. It also, for really functional, I sit on a number of boards
Yes.
across Africa.
Yes.
And I think and every board is different, right? Every board is different. Some boards have been around for a while. The company's been around for a while. And so the boards kind of operate in almost a very perfunctory way. They just kind of do the same thing.
Yes.
And then others will maybe startup companies. It's much more dynamic. There's always a fire drill or some drama.
Yes.
So it really runs the gamut. And so in the African context, it's great because again, these are all companies. Those people who sit on boards know these are companies that are really trying to make a difference. They're really trying to do something relevant for their demographic, for their community. So it's exciting to play that role. As a board member, it is critical to stay in the seat of governance and oversight and not to meddle on the operational side. But at the same time, board members have to pay attention. And so it's a really difficult balance to strike because you're supposed to have an oversight role, but you're not supposed to get into the weeds. So you have to be really skilled at asking the right questions, right? You have to be very skilled at leadership and asking the right questions and focusing on the right things. So yeah, I've seen board members, not on my boards that I sit on, but on boards I've sat in the past.
Other people's boards.
Where board members have, gotten too involved. And on certain issues, and that has led to an outcome that for the company it was difficult to navigate around. So you definitely see that. That's the role of a board member. But there are also board members who think their role is just to come to the board meeting every quarter, right?
Know nothing about
Yes, they just come and they chat and they do.
I was there, wasn't I?
Yeah, I was there, and they move on, and that's certainly not enough, right? Because the board members do have a responsibility for oversight, and it does require, not getting in the weeds, but really providing a sounding board for management, a way for management to also because the management's reporting to the board, so that they understand. They have to understand the business as well. The board really needs to understand the business. So it takes more than just coming to the board meeting every quarter.
When you say understand the business, do you mean understand business operations or P&L?
By understanding the business, I mean, what drives the business, right? So, and on every board, you're going to have people who have strong financial skills. You should have people with strong financial skills.
You should at least have.
Yeah, you should. And then everything else, you kind of have a mix. And that's, again, where diversity comes in. You want to have a diverse board, people with different skills. But you definitely need to have a couple people with some financial skills. So you don't need to understand exactly how the P&L works, profit and loss statement works. But you need to have a general sense of where you're going, right? And what the signaling is, right? So a good board member is going to be able to pay attention to what the management is telling them, again, and ask good questions and keep asking questions until you peel the onion back and figure out what's really happening here, right? If you ask enough questions, they will tell you, right? But if you ask superficial questions, you won't get there.
M.A. Essien Lori, we are getting into the crux of it. We're going to be understanding what makes a good leader, what is good leadership all about, and then, of course, we'll be breaking apart and defining what unconscious bias is and how it can help you succeed at the workplace and in business in general, right?
Yes.
4.4 Spice FM. Good afternoon, Nairobi. May this year bring you blessings on blessings on blessings. I'm Olivia Otieno. This is Double O Direct with a woman host, music by women and women guests like Lorraine Onduru, a woman author whose book She Shall Be Called Woman is up for grabs. I got a couple of copies. Head on to Twitter, SpiceFMKE. Find out about how you can get yourself a copy of the book She Shall Be Called Woman. But right now, I'm on the conversation with an amazing woman. Her name is M.A. Essien Lori. She was, for 6 years, IFC country manager in Nigeria. She has master's, MBA. She's educated like crazy and tons of experience in the field of organizational health. Today, we're going to go into unconscious bias. But before that, I need to understand leaders and leadership. Traits, skills. To make good ones, what do we need?
I think, first of all, that's a great question. And I would always love to lead with that because I think it's leadership first. And a lot of times when people say leadership or leaders, they think of, the head of the organization, the top. But leadership happens at every single level. And I fundamentally believe that leadership happens at every single level. And I think the core skill that a good leader has is the ability to listen. The ability to listen, right? The ability to understand what's happening around him or her, to be able to take a pulse of what's happening, and to be able to extract from all the team members, everybody around, and then just make a decision, a set of decisions based on that. That's a good leader from my perspective. A good leader is a good listener. Jack Welch, who was is the CEO of what's the company we see? Gosh, I'm forgetting right now. It'll come to me. Yeah, Jack Welch. He wrote a book called Winning, I think. And he talked about the fact that for him, he never wanted to be the smartest person in the room. He never wanted to be the smartest person in the room. And he was a famous CEO, right? Because he said, if I'm the smartest person in the room, then what are these people doing here?
How am I get out? They need to get out. I need to find some smarter people.
He wanted smarter people in the room.
Yeah.
A good leader recognizes that he or she has a lot to learn from a team that is diverse. That's another aspect of a good leader. Recognizing that his or her perspective is limited. It's narrow. It's informed by his or her own experience. But when they have the opportunity to hear different perspectives, especially perspectives that could be very different from their own perspective, that's where the power is. That's where good leadership comes from.
But lots of people want psychophancy. They want to click.
They're comfortable with that. And I understand why. Maybe they experienced that in their household. They experienced a very dictatorial environment in their household. So they feel comfortable when someone is banging on them and telling them what to do. And if somebody's asking their opinion, they feel very uncomfortable. I understand that.
But the other way is also true. With regards to the leader, for example, the leader wanting people who don't want to give opinions.
Yeah.
What would you say to that?
The leader that doesn't want to give opinions.
No, that doesn't want to get opinion. Varied. Because you find organizations, for example, where you have, like I said, diversity. And with diversity comes a differing of opinions with regards to current situation, hopes and dreams for the future, and how to get there, right? So how do you, in a intelligent way, as a leader, encourage those various opinions? Because you said some people might have some issue expressing that, and then go into implementation.
Yeah, that's a tough one. And I think there's only one way to do it. And that is for the leader to show some vulnerability.
Okay.
Now, when people hear that, they're like, no, my goodness, you can't be vulnerable in front of your team. They want you to be the victor. They want you to be the captain of the ship. They need to feel comfortable that you know where you're going. So that's very true. But what I mean when I say showing vulnerability is just to show that you're a human being, that you're fallible. You make mistakes as a leader. You're not always perfect, right?
Okay.
And then when you do that, and people call it vulnerable leadership, right? When you do that, it opens a door for somebody else to feel more comfortable.
Yes.
When they see you, not just as the head of the organization, they see you as a human being, right? Who is fallible. They're going to be more willing to raise their hand up and say something. But if you, as the leader, stand there and you are perfect, you have not made any mistakes.
Yeah.
You are always right.
Yeah.
Right. You don't know how to say sorry. You don't know how to apologize for the mistake you made.
Yes.
People will just be looking at you. Right? And they'll be wishing for your downfall the whole time, by the way.
So you've outlined some interesting points. You've talked about diversity. You've talked about understanding that you're limited and vulnerability. But three things you've said make a good leader or are really important for successful leadership are listening. Then you've said you need to understand, right, certain aspects. But then you need to also be decisive.
Yeah. Yeah.
How important is decisiveness in owning a decision? Is it making a decision and then following through? How important is that in leadership? Because sometimes you hear the listening, you get the listening, you get the understanding, but the person doesn't make a decision. So you're always just in limbo,
Yeah, that's an interesting one because that's probably maybe one of the most challenging forms of that. That would be one of the most challenging leaders I could work for. Somebody who doesn't take decisions. I've worked for leaders who take decisions without talking to people, don't listen, those, I'm used to those.
Yeah.
They just decide and tell you later.
Yeah.
I'm not used to those who just don't make decisions. They feel paralyzed maybe by decision making. That's probably going to be even tougher.
Yes.
Because then it creates within the team a bit of lethargy, definitely paralysis, right? So if the leader is paralyzed, the team is going to be paralyzed, and everybody will be suspended. And what do we do? And ultimately, I think what happens in that kind of situation is that people's motivation just
Plummets.
slowly kind of deteriorates. What you do in that situation is, I think that's a tricky one. I think what the leader, that leader probably needs some coaching. By the way, we all need coaching. All of us need coaching in something.
I got your number, girl. I got your number.
We all need coaching.
Yeah.
But that leader probably needs some coaching on how to take tough decisions.
Because we can't keep complaining about the same thing over and over and over again. We can't keep highlighting the same issues over and over and over again. Shouldn't we make some sort of decision, for good or for bad, and then just implement something?
I think most leaders who are admired and respected have that perspective, right? So they recognize that no decision is perfect.
Yeah.
But because I'm the leader, I have to own the decision, and we're going to follow through, and I'm going to take responsibility for what didn't happen the way it should. That is a good leader, right? That what you described to me is a good leader, understanding that there's no perfect decision. You make the decision and you own the decision all the way through. That to me is even if at the end of it is failure, even if the leaders made the decision and it just wasn't the right thing to do, there's failure there, that leader can still be respected and admired by his or her team because of that decisiveness, right?
Yes.
And I think that's what we're looking for, right? We're looking for people who inspire us, not because they're perfect, but because they're decisive, because they have integrity. We haven't used that word, but integrity to me is critical. They are decisive, but they're decisive with integrity. When you put that combination of things together, even if the leader ends up going in a direction that's not the right direction for the company and it leads to some sort of setback, you're still going to find team members who still respect and admire that person.
Yes.
Because they held their head up through a difficult time.
I absolutely, positively love that. I was going to take a break, but I just want to ask you one thing. Define bias.
Bias is, we have to include unconscious bias on that, right? Because bias, by definition, is an automatic response. It is without judgment. You do it without thinking, right? Unconscious bias, we like to think of it as unconscious bias. Some people call it implicit bias, but ultimately it's something that happens without you thinking about it, right? And it happens without you thinking about it because you've had an entire lifetime of experiences that have informed your view of that thing.
Okay.
So it happens like this,
Yes.
without thinking, but it is as a result of years and years and years of experience.
SpiceFM live streaming, standardmedia.co.ke. More hits on the way. Got some Beyonce, some Lady Gaga. Don't just listen, watch as I continue my conversation with a woman who is an expert in organizational health, 20 years experience in developmental finance, MBA in finance, master's in international economics, went to some Ivies. Yeah. Wharton, I heard, is the best business school in the US, #1 in business. Explains why she was working for the IFC for over 20 years, 6 years as country manager in Nigeria. And now you are helping leaders in organizations to be aware, to be better leaders, to be aware of the unconscious bias that they could have in the organization, or that is in the organization, so that more of their employees can succeed and the organization can succeed as a whole.
Absolutely.
That transformation, at what point did that happen, and what actually happened with regards to trainings, learnings for you to become an expert in organizational health?
Yeah, I mean, for me, as I recognize that there are so many businesses that are failing because of
Poor leadership.
Yeah.
Let's be honest.
It's just, poor leadership, essentially. And it's heartbreaking because, again, in the African context, we can't afford that. We need much more economic activity, not less. And so at the root of it for me was leadership. And so I started to just kind of pull the thread and kind of figure out what is this about. That's actually how I started training on facilitating conversations on unconscious bias, bringing it all together, doing a lot of reading on the topic. And I read a book that was, for me, is my go-to book. It's called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And it's written by my organizational health guru. His name is Patrick Lencioni. I think many consider him to be kind of one of the gurus on organizational health. And he approaches organizational health in a way that really resonates with me, because it is about leadership at the core and how teams work together and how you work on those dynamics. Because when you get all that right, then those smart people can do the things that they're supposed to do, right? It doesn't matter what the sector is, but you need to have those dynamics, right? He's written a number of books. So his methodology is something that I follow. He has a new kind of methodology out there called the Working Genius, which basically is something that I also administer. And it really helps people think about how they show up on a team, right? And so we've spent some time really trying to understand how to map people. So when people come and they want to do this, we map them, and then we figure out what is the role that they play on the team. Are they the innovator, or are they the executor, or are they the supporter, right? Everybody plays a role on the team. So this approach to organizational health is what resonates most with me. Other people define it differently, but for me, it's really about how leadership organizes itself to make sure that you have a team that's effective, so that you have a very productive workplace, so that people can operate at their best. Who doesn't want that? Who doesn't want their team to be at their absolute best? So for me, that's the core of it. So I've done quite a bit of trainings on all of this, working with companies, and unconscious bias has played a really important role in my approach to organizational health, because it is a way to help people think about how bias shows up in their decision making, how bias shows up in the workplace, right? And when bias shows up in decision making, and when bias shows up in the workplace, it can have, if it's not done well, it can have really detrimental impact on the company, right? If people are not working at their best, if people are suboptimal in what they're doing, the company suffers, right? So all of these things tie together for me. So bias, understanding unconscious bias for me is a way in which people can, leaders in particular, but like I said, everybody can help people understand why we make the decisions we make, how and why people are motivated to do the things that they do. I spent, while I was working at IFC, I was asked to do diversity and inclusion work. I didn't want to do it at first because I thought I have enough work to do, but when you're asked by your leadership to do something, you do it. And so I kind of fell into unconscious bias as a default. I didn't know anything about it when I was asked to learn about it and then help World Bank staff understand it. So I knew nothing, never even heard the words before, to be honest. Yes. And so I got trained in it. And so for probably 4 years, I've facilitated conversations with scores of teams, hundreds of people within the World Bank Group and outside.
And this is not just in Nigeria. This was globally.
Globally, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. With teams all over the world, in place, in face-to-face and virtually. Once COVID happened, I did a lot of it virtually. Yeah. And now I do it when people ask me, I know them, I do it for small groups like church groups or social groups, just people who are very serious about wanting to be more effective as a team.
Yes.
And I just do it for them because ultimately I want to evangelize about unconscious bias, because I think it explains a lot about what we see in the world. I think it explains a lot about what we see in the workplace. And if we have this context, we have this information, we have this knowledge, we can just build more empathy. And building more empathy, we just make better decisions. It just ultimately takes us all to a better place when we have this grounding. That's my belief about how powerful understanding unconscious bias is.
I love what you've said about be more effective as a team. Be more effective as a team, and as an organization, you can then thrive, or at least grow. What are the fundamentals of unconscious bias? If anything, let's start with what we must know about this concept.
The first thing to know, and if you take nothing away from this conversation, the first thing, and maybe the last thing, is to be human is to be biased.
To be human is to be biased.
As a human being, we are by nature biased. It is what makes us human. Fundamentally core. And the reason why I emphasize that is because it's important for us to take the negative connotation away from the word bias. Most of us, when we hear bias, we think of it as negative. It's like, who wants to be called biased? I don't, but sometimes we say it in a positive way, but most times someone's saying you're biased and they're doing
so you're prejudiced.
Right, exactly. It doesn't necessarily feel right. But actually, it's not positive or negative. It's neutral. It is what makes us human. As I mentioned earlier, it's an automatic response, right? It happens without judgment. And so that is the thing that happens in the moment. But what happened before is what led to the moment, right? And so when you think about bias and you think about defining it and what it looks like, it's going to look different for every person. But the context is, and this is where it becomes really important for people to understand that everybody enters every conversation with some level of bias. And with that information alone, there's power, right? Because if I can acknowledge, Olivia, that you have bias and you acknowledge that you have bias and I acknowledge my biases, we can come to the table not trying to be perfect, not pretending that, we're in a workplace, so we're all objective. We're not objective. We're human beings. We're completely subjective in everything, right? So if we can have that respect for each other and understanding about each other, we can have a better conversation. If you say, listen, this kind of thing rubs me the wrong way. When I see this or hear that, it just rankles me for some reason. If I can be honest and say, listen, people of a certain ilk, a certain religion, a certain tribe, or whatever it is, for some reason, I just don't feel comfortable with them. And if I can say that to you,
or sexual orientation,
exactly, and if I can say that without feeling judged, and I can only do that if you say that to me too, right? We have to have a safe space to be able to have those conversations. It's leaders who create that kind of safe space, by the way, right? Leaders, if a leader's not able to do that for his or her team, it's oftentimes very difficult for a team to do it on their own. It's possible, but difficult. But when you have a leader who embraces that, man, it's just like, it's a waterfall. The team gets it. Everybody feels more comfortable to have those kind of conversations. It doesn't happen overnight, but it happens over time.
Noon, I'm Olivia Otieno. This is Double O Direct Saturdays from 10 a.m. Got an amazing track by Whitney Houston and some Ashanti coming up. But I'm with M.A. Essien Lore. MBA in Finance, Masters in Economics, International Development experience for over 20 years. She was working with the IFC as country manager in Nigeria for 6 years, up until very, 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 very recently. And we've been talking about unconscious bias. In fact, we've actually defined the fact that to be human is to be biased. So it's something we shouldn't be ashamed of. It's something we should just be aware of. It's neutral. It's neither good nor bad. It just is. But being aware of it and working on it helps us to be better in the workplace, especially when it comes to leadership. At the core, it's all about leadership. So give me some examples, Emma, of how unconscious bias pops up in the workplace and how we can use it to better ourselves as employees and within the organization as a whole.
Yeah, and the conversation about the workplace is really important, right? Because most of us spend 50%, even more of our time in the workplace. And many of us define ourselves by our jobs.
I noticed that they are manager, director before they're anything else.
Exactly. So it really matters what happens in the workplace. And no one should downplay that. The reality is that it means more than we would like it to mean, right? The workplace, what happens in the workplace. And many of us bring what happens in the workplace home. So not only is it important for what happens to us for that time, we bring it home and then we become different people with our family. So it is really important to think about how bias shows up in the workplace. There are a lot of studies that are really interesting studies on how some of this plays out. There's one that I think is really interesting. This is an American example, so pardon the geographical context, but there's a book by Malcolm Gladwell, called Blink, a very famous book. And he, in that book, talks about a study that was done on CEOs in America. Now, 14% of CEOs, 14% of American males, 14% of American males are taller than 6 foot. Just 14%.
Okay.
Take a guess as to how many CEOs in America are taller than 6 feet.
Okay.
Only 14% of the entire population.
Okay.
Only 14% are taller than 6 feet.
I'm taking it that Americans like tall CEOs. I'm just looking
There
at
you have
Steve
it.
Jobs.
There you have
I
it.
think they like tall leaders.
60%.
60%.
60% of CEOs in America are above 6 feet, but only 14% of the population.
Is above 6
Yeah.
feet.
And what does that tell you? That tells you that, I mean, certainly the board is not sitting there saying one of the criteria must be
A tall man.
Yes, we don't. Yeah. But the reality is that the bias of the kind
Short
of primordial sense that people have around tall men, which is safety, protection, that sort of thing.
A leader.
It has nothing to do with what we're thinking rationally, right? It's something that we have kind of planted in us and instinctually, right?
Yes.
And it takes somebody to step away from that to say, hey, we're not hiring somebody based on what they look per se,
Yeah.
but what they're able to deliver, right? And that study is compelling, right? Because, and it's not just CEOs, it's also very senior people in the military, that sort of thing.
Yeah, government.
It becomes this criterion that people are selecting for unconsciously.
Yeah.
One example of how it shows up in the workplace.
Yes.
We are making decisions. So maybe it's not height in the African context. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's it's ethnicity, it's grammar, the way you speak.
Yes.
Right? It's your political affiliation.
Okay.
All these things show up for people and we are unconsciously making decisions. Many very learned professionals
Yes.
will tell you that they're very objective. They're very, very objective. They know how to make objective decisions. The reality is that almost every decision we are making is subjective. It is influenced by our experiences, period.
Yes.
Right? We see something, we hear something, it brings back a memory of something, we can't even access it, and then we make a decision based on it. That is what bias is. That's how it shows up.
Yes. Yes.
And so in the workplace, what we found is that in decision making, whether people get promoted, whether they get that next new opportunity, whether they get that raise, whether they get access to, a new, something new or something interesting. All these things matter, right? And that's how bias can play into the workplace, where the person who has access gets that opportunity just because. So another quick example.
Yes.
This will be my management team. Several years ago, we were having a conversation and we were rating all the staff, we have this barometer. We rate people based on they get a rating, right?
Okay.
And so on the management team, one of the most senior people said, "Oh, my assistant is fantastic. She's so wonderful.
Okay.
Man, she's wonderful. She walks on water." This is now our boss,
Yes.
right? So everybody was a bit quiet, right?
Yeah.
And then somebody said, "I don't know about that, And then somebody else piped in and said, "Yeah, in fact." So then we all said, "Actually, that's your proximity bias speaking. Because she's sitting next to you and she can read your every facial expression, of course you're going to give her a higher rating. But that assistant who's sitting on the other side of the room, she's down there, you don't see her that often, but she's just as effective. She doesn't get that rating because she doesn't have the proximity to you."
Yes.
So people got cute with it and called it proximity bias, right?
Yes.
I'm closer to you, so I know how you think as the boss, so I get the benefits because of that. This is how bias kind of plays into the workplace very, very subtly,
Yes,
right?
yes.
We're not making, and when we called this person out, she wasn't happy about being called out, right? And we said, "You have this bias." She didn't want to admit it, but ultimately she had to. And that it wasn't fair that you give somebody a higher rating just because you think they walk on water. We're telling you that she doesn't,
Exactly.
right? She walks on your water, but the rest of us, she's swimming like the rest of us.
And one thing that's come up in the past is that people will rate somebody as good or bad, and then you realize people are good and bad based on the person who's rating them. And someone who you may think is very, very good is only very, very good for you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
With regards to others, they're terrible.
This is it. And this is actually, you're hitting on one of the ways that we can mitigate bias. I want to make a point here. I'm not advocating for anybody to try and erase their bias or eliminate their bias. It's not possible. So I said to be biased is to be human. So that means you cannot eliminate your bias. If you do, you become a robot, right? So we're not trying to eliminate bias. What we're trying to do is have awareness about what our biases are, and then try and mitigate them when they're have negative impacts.
Yes.
So awareness is key, right? So just understanding that you have a bias is critically important.
Yes.
We all do, right? And what I advise people when I talk to different teams about this is, in a safe space with somebody who you know and you trust, ask them, why do I like this person so much? Why do I feel connected to this person? It's a bias. It's
cute.
Your bias.
They're so cute.
Yeah.
They're so cute.
If that's
so
a bias. Similarly, why don't I like this person?
Yeah.
I don't want this person on my team.
They're too cute.
I don't feel a certain way. Anytime you have a feeling, that gut feeling is typically your bias telling you it's at work, right?
Bias vis-a-vis insecurity. How does that come in? Because a lot of people have outlined to me in the past that they feel particular bias that has been, towards them is as a result of insecurity. So-and-so is just insecure. But I see now when we're having this conversation, it may not be necessarily insecurity. Maybe it's something deeper rooted, or it's simply a form of bias that we haven't outlined.
And this is why listening comes in, because it's neat to jump to that conclusion. It's very shallow, right? So the opportunity is to spend some time talking to that person and understanding a bit about who they are. And that's how you build empathy. Yes. Right? You build empathy by having conversations with people and also being vulnerable, admitting where you have a bias, right? Somebody who's saying, oh, they're just jealous, ask that person what their bias is. They'll find it very difficult to tell you, because they won't want to admit it, right? But that kind of person, they want to keep that to their chest. At the end of the day, we all have our biases, and we don't want to admit them because they're a bit embarrassing. We're supposed to be, with it, learn it. We're supposed to be objective. You don't want to admit that when you see somebody dressed a certain way, or when you hear a certain name, you just have a response to it. And that response might lead that person to have less of an opportunity than somebody else. The way bias shows up in the workplace on a kind of regular basis is by something we call these micro behaviors, right? Micro affirmations and micro inequities. Yes. So, for example, eye contact, right? If I'm having a conversation with you and I just don't like you, I just won't look at you. I'll look everywhere but you. And then how do you feel if you're talking to me and I'm not giving you the respect of eye contact? You feel devalued. Yeah. Completely. You feel diminished. That's how it happens. And it's small. And you may not even be able to tell your colleague that's how I felt, because it was such a small thing. But that is the power of those micro behaviors in the workplace. Shake somebody's hand. You don't give them a firm shake. You're just reluctant, right? And so those types of things show up all the time in workplaces. You walk into your boss's office for a meeting and they don't look at you. They are on the phone. They're distracted. If you really respect somebody, you give them time and you show them that you respect them. Right. And so they're small things, and it's hard to talk about them. I always tell people to focus on micro affirmations as well. If I like you, you're going to know it. Right? Yes. Because I'm going to look at you and I'm going to smile at you and I'm going to say, come over, let's be friends and let me do something for you. Right? And you will just think, I'm just a great person. But actually, it's because something about you, I'm attracted to that. And so I want to bring you into my ecosystem. But you don't realize it's a bias that I have. You just think you're a great person. Actually, I'm just acting out on my bias. And that's, again, my micro affirmation is I'm affirming you by looking at you, by saying nice things about you. That's how it shows up in the workplace. And so when we can call these things out and talk about them, that's where the power is. It's difficult to do, but that's where the opportunity is. In small groups with people you trust.
Wrapping it up with M.A. Essien Lore. She is an expert in organizational health. Can you come and do some kind of workshops for us here at the Standard Group?
Sure. Absolutely.
Are you very expensive?
Sure, I can. I can come in.
We're going to talk about that rate.
We can talk about that.
Are you looking at, we're going to start with like the C-suite guys? Or how would you like to go about this training?
think it's best to start there.
From the top.
Yeah, from the top.
All right.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about it. And usually your workshops, how long do they last? Like, what are we looking at?
It completely depends on what the needs are. It doesn't have to be a workshop. Yeah, it depends. The key thing is to be very flexible to understand where the organization wants to go. So, yeah.
I love your diplomacy.
Yeah.
You're clearly up with the diplomacy. But seriously, now just to wrap everything up, because we don't have much time, not just parting words, but a roundup of what we've discussed, plus what you think we need to take home from today's conversation.
So I think, again, key, take the judgment out of bias. It's not a bad thing. We all are biased. It makes us human. And if we can understand that, then we can have a bit of empathy for everybody else, right? So we're all biased. That's the number one thing. And then the second, I would say, is try and take some time to understand what your own biases are and what your triggers are, right? And the best way to do that is with people who you trust, because they're going to keep your confidence, right? So if you are struggling with something and you just don't understand why you have a reaction, or you just don't like something or someone, or, talk to somebody who knows you well and try and get to the bottom of it and just try and understand it. If you start asking yourself those questions, that's just going to help right there, because you're opening yourself up for just understanding yourself a bit more. That's the second thing. And then I would say, in the moment when something happens, when you have that feeling, that they call it a gut instinct, right? Mm-hmm. Gut instinct typically is code for unconscious bias, right? There's something that is happening, and all of your experiences of your past are making you make a quick decision on something. That's typically what it is. So you still have a moment to pause. Just pause and reflect. Ask yourself, what's happening here? Why do I like this person? Why don't I like this person? What about the situation makes me comfortable or uncomfortable? Because if you're able to do that, then you might be able to make a better decision, a more informed decision. You might be able to say, okay, listen, in this situation, there's too much baggage for me. Let me bring in some diverse perspectives. That's always going to lead you to opening up your thinking and hopefully a better decision, but only if you pause. If you don't take the time, if you just go on your gut instinct on everything, right, and you don't take the time to think through it, oftentimes you'll make a decision, but it may not be informed by the diverse opinions that will get you something that is better for everybody. So pause and reflect. Pause. There's a lot of power in the pause. There's power in the pause. So give yourself that. And then again, recognizing that everybody has unconscious bias means that you can build empathy for yourself and for everybody else, just to have a bit more empathy. You see somebody you just don't like their political background, you don't like where they're from, that everything about them just
irks you.
Yeah, irks you. Exactly. You could actually, if you took the time, you could actually understand that person's perspective. You may not like the person, but if you can have some context as to why he or she behaves that way and is that way, that means that you can potentially have a better conversation. If you have to negotiate with that person, you can have a better negotiation if you've taken the time to do that. So there's that power in the pause and that opportunity, and it all rests with you, right? It all rests with all of us taking the decision to say, let me just think about this a little bit. And then I'll just end with Maya Angelou's quote. One of my favorite authors, Maya Angelou, the late Maya Angelou. She said, if you know better, do better. If you know better, do better.
Absolutely brilliant. M.A. Essien Lore. LinkedIn is where you can find her, right?
Yes, LinkedIn.
It's just your name?
Yes.
Nothing fancy?
Nothing fancy.
Like, unconscious bias guru 254 or something?
No.
Okay, fantastic. M.A. Essien Lore. Lore is spelled Lore. Thank you so much for taking the time. You came in here. You joined me on 00 Direct. I wish you the most phenomenal weekend.
Thank you, Olivia. You're awesome. Thank you for the show. Thank you very much. Thanks, Mumbi.